Welcome to Open Mind Integration. I'm Christopher Gunlock, Psychedelic Harm Reduction Class Part 2, the Pharmacology of Psychedelics. And be sure to check out all 12 parts of the Psychedelic Harm Reduction class available on my website. You can purchase them one at a time or in the whole package. And the disclaimer. And here is the outline of what we'll be covering in the Pharmacology of Psychedelics. So there is a reason I like to start this conversation around DMT and what I call the DMT molecular neighborhood. Because when you look at things at the level of the molecule, the chemistry, DMT really kind of floats to the surface in a way that stands out. And you can see that in a couple ways here on this slide, describing the decarboxylation and methylation process involved in synthesizing DMT from some compounds that are very readily available in the human body. And then on the other end of things, you can see that DMT can be synthesized into psilocin and psilocybin found in magic mushrooms. Now, I don't think that process happens in the human body, but in nature, it certainly does. So this is what I call the DMT molecular neighborhood. We have there DMT in the center, but then surrounding it, a variety of compounds, many of which are the classical psychedelics. We have psilocybin, psilocin, LSD, mescaline, and then 5-MeO-DMT there too. Definitely an important one. But also you'll see some other familiar ones, but ones you wouldn't normally consider a drug, serotonin and melatonin, ones that are readily available in the human body, particularly the brain. But then also tryptophan and tryptamine, not dimethyltryptamine, which is what DMT is, but just tryptamine, which as you can see is almost exactly the same as DMT. It's just missing a single methyl branch, one step away. And then tryptophan is what breaks down into tryptamine. So this is important because we have a connection. And DMT is this beautiful, elegant, simple structure, yet incredibly powerful. It's uncanny, real consequences in the human brain and in nature. So I'll draw your attention then to this representation of what we call the indole ring and the methyl branch, what's outlined in yellow here. So this illustrates the close connection, similarity from this molecular level to DMT, DMT kind of being at the center of this again. And even LSD and ibogaine, they have the indole ring there. I just didn't fully outline it. They're a bit more complex, obviously, but still come from the same basic tryptamine structure. So this, coupled with the phenomenological elements of DMT, the characteristics that make it so prevalent in shamanic cultures and spirituality and the world of psychedelics in general, it's kind of this incredible center point. So here's just another way of looking at it, the abbreviations and the chemical names, the nomenclature. You can see there the dimethyltryptamine, the tryptamine basic structure is in all these other psychedelics and even serotonin. So here we are then, the extension of the molecular neighborhood of DMT, which we can also just call the tryptamines. These tryptamines have a very powerful synergy with the monoamine oxidase inhibitors, the MAOIs. And we bring this up because in the very least, humans have had this symbiosis with this particular combination. Again, in the shamanic magic arts, the traditional spirituality, Um, it's big. It's a serious, really uncanny discovery, but um, it's undeniable that we were meant to commune with this. You just find it in so many different cultures that people are putting these plants together that have this special combination. And so from a molecular perspective, we can completely validate that. And even from a perspective of other neurotransmitters, which like serotonin, melatonin, we would put in those categories. There's some good evidence and some people publishing in prestigious journals that DMT fits the criteria of a neurotransmitter. In other words, it is made in the brain. It's really not a far-fetched statement to say the least anymore. I mean, there's some hard evidence. There certainly needs to be more research for, I think, certain people to be convinced. But I'll say a lot more about this in part 5 of the harm reduction class, the neurobiology and psychedelics. So here we'll just talk dose and duration. All right, dose dependency. When we use that term, we're talking about how changing the dose of a medicine changes the effects. So in blue, I've outlined just a few examples of increasing the dose increases the effect of, just the general intensity of the drug experience. The body stress load, how much strain does it put on the physiology? Usually the duration length is affected. And the tolerance levels. You build more tolerance the higher the dose. Right, but then there's some opposite inverse relationships too. You lose that sense of normalcy with the higher dose, right? You dissociate from the ego. You have a less singular perspective, a more holistic, perhaps multidimensional perspective. The ego dependence, I would say, is how much a person needs to see, or it just sees from that perspective. Again, that singular way of looking at things is not so prevalent in the psychedelic experience. Ease of integration, this is what I would say is a potential risk of psychedelics, taking too much psychedelics. Sometimes I even like to say, in terms of dose, don't take more than you can integrate. Just a little rule of thumb there. So this shows a little bit more of that physiological response. From a hormonal perspective, you see a lot of the basic stress hormones are elevated under the psychedelic experience. I believe that study in particular is looking at psilocybin. But this is also really just what we see from an acute stress response. Anytime your level of excitation is going up a little bit, this is just what happens, and so you would follow the same precautions as if you were, maybe doing something exciting like playing sports or something physical, obviously, or just anything where there's a certain rate of danger that's increased. You respond to it, you balance it with some safety measures, some intentionality. So yeah, blood pressure, heart rate. The graphs on the left are illustrating the time, the factor of time in this. How you usually get a curve where it increases gradually and then decreases over time. So we'll give you a little side by side of some dose ranges and durations here of specific psychedelics so you can see really how different these can be, how important it is to pay attention to this. LSD is kind of the outlier. Its potency is pretty unrivaled. We're talking millionths of a gram, micrograms, 10 millionths to 80 millionths of a gram, whereas in milligrams, we're talking 1,000th. So with DMT, you might be taking 10 milligrams, which is like 10 1,000ths of a gram. And then up another kind of factors of 10 in mushrooms, the whole mushroom, especially fresh mushrooms, you're talking entire grams, and that's another 1,000 times more than what you would be using with these fine powders or crystals of DMT. And in terms of duration, again, LSD really kind of off the charts there. You can get into, the 12 to 24-hour range if you take enough, and DMT on the complete other end of the spectrum, very, very short-lived but very intense. And then mushrooms, depending on how you take it, it can range quite a bit, but definitely in that mid-range. And then when you look in the realm of MDMA, ibogaine, ketamine, you're seeing somewhat more similar dose ranges. The powders and the crystals, they tend to be in that milligram range. Ibogaine, you can get the pure stuff, in which case it's still not as potent, but it's still under a gram is what most people are taking. And then duration, you've got some medium duration MDMA, and ketamine is more on the low end. But ibogaine, yeah, that's another extreme duration one that rivals LSD. So we'll continue on with some practical pharmacology here. And dosing effect tiers. This is how I kind of segment the dose ranges in a way that I think it makes it easy to understand. I put them in four groups, and you can pretty much look at every psychedelic from this four group theory of dose effects. So yeah, let's take a look. So, microdosing. This is probably for good reason a popular one nowadays. It's one that's easy to kind of step into if it's more you're a beginner level or first timer or something like that. We're shooting for really low effects or sub noticeable effects. Sub perceptual, I think, is a funny term because if you can't perceive anything, then is it working? Is kind of the question. Even in homeopathy, which is microdosing to the extreme, you still. That's the point. Is like it has an effect that if you're sensitive enough, you can perceive it. So I think it's more a matter of what types of effects are we looking for, and when you're in the microdose range, yeah, you're feeling a different kind of medicine. Really, it's you don't have any of the visionary qualities, the really intense, altered perspectives, expanded perspectives. Microdosing, you're more likely to be noticing, slight mood shifts or energy levels or just creativity, more subtle things, but can still have an impact, especially when you're taking them more frequently. And that's kind of the benefit with microdosing is people end up doing it more often than your big doses. Um, Calibration we'll talk about. Basically, starting low is the way to go. But protocols. How many days a week do you do it? How often do you do it? I come from the approach of you find your own in general. You want to feel that out. I think the more mindful, the more responsive you are to what you're putting in your body, the more sustainable it is. I think once you start going down the strict regimen route, yeah, that's how is that different from just a pharmaceutical then? Are you just treating the symptoms at that point, or are you being more intentional? Are you trying to actually better your habits, better your perspectives, better your health? And so I'll talk more about that though too. So let's talk psilocybin mushrooms specifically. This is a very common one to microdose. You're looking at the dose ranges, about 0.25, zero point 0.2, zero point 0.1. That's going to be in milligrams, 250 milligrams, 200 milligrams, or 100 milligrams or less. I've microdosed down to even 10, 20 milligrams with mushrooms. And of course, the potency of the mushrooms can vary widely. I'll say more about that in the next slide. But mushrooms, especially compared to LSD, the microdosing effect seems to be more mellow, more in the body. The more mood-related effects is what people report. A calming effect, an antidepressant type effect, and as we talk about LSD, there's a bit of contrast to that. But I think really in general, anything you would notice with the larger dose of mushrooms, you're going to notice that at the microdoses, just obviously to a much lower degree. So maybe some of the creativity in there, the playfulness, that kind of sense of just kind of feeling good and happy. People notice that with microdosing mushrooms quite a bit. Now, a very important point to make, you'll hear me remind folks of this often, but here's a little evidence to show that the potency from mushroom to mushroom can be wildly different. I mean, you're looking at some types of mushrooms, not necessarily just within the cubensis family, but you look at like azarescens, bohemica, cyanescens, similinciata. These are potentially twice as strong as your cubensis varieties. So when we're talking 5 grams or a gram or whatever, or 100 milligrams, please take it with a grain of salt. You really don't know how strong it is until you try it. We're talking an organic substance. Even from the same batch of mushrooms, mushroom to mushroom, will have different psilocybin content. Another thing to note here is the psilocin content. I didn't mean to, make it seem like that doesn't matter. The psilocybin is just the one we talk about most often because when you dry your mushrooms, that's about all you have left. The psilocin degrades much quicker, I think, from oxygen or moisture. And so just by the nature of most people, they just use dried mushrooms because you can keep them longer. Psilocybin is generally going to determine the potency of your mushrooms. I would encourage folks, if you get a chance, to try a fresh mushroom sometime. You'll get the full psilocin effect, along with any other of the alkaloids and really any kind of the chemical constituents that go along with it that may not be there in a dried form. But picking it fresh, especially, you're getting the full package. The whole thing, the whole entourage effect, and I think it's pretty special. So yeah, if you want to, we'll talk about potency later, but just so there's some tips there about how to maintain that. So if we're talking LSD microdosing, yeah, first of all, the dose ranges, again, very, very different. We're looking at micrograms, millionths of a gram, even down to 10 or even single millionths of a gram. If you were to look at that amount, let's say in crystal form, it would probably be about the size of a grain of sand, if not smaller. So potentially microscopic. And usually you're getting it on the tabs, but even with the tabs, if you're cutting off a tiny little piece, it's still hard to know how much is in there. And so what most people do is they dissolve it into a liquid solution where then you can dilute it as much as you want, and then you get really fairly precise with how much LSD is in a single drop, and you can dose as low as you want. So yeah, compared to mushrooms, a lot of people describe LSD to be more stimulating. There's more of a wakefulness effect there, but potentially to the point of increasing anxiety for some folks. I would say more likely if you have some pre-existing anxiety. LSD is a general amplifier. It's gonna take wherever you're at and just make it more intense. So if you're already kind of a little anxious, there could be possibility of it getting augmented. Now, some people do find though that it gives you the opportunity to chill out, to get out of those patterns. And I would say the distinction there is intentionality. Intentionality and what you actually have in terms of your exposure to things, your activities, your behavior, your mindfulness. LSD, I think, is one to very much do in a layered approach. Don't just do the microdose. Do the microdose plus meditate, plus eat healthy, have good healthy habits, some meaningful, engaging activities in life. If all you're doing is microdosing LSD, chances are you'll probably just get worse if you're not doing anything else to help yourself. So, yeah, layered microdosing. So the psycholytic dose, we're in the dose ranges now where you're definitely noticing it. You're out of that microdose range where it maybe was subperceptual or really subtle, and here it's definitely there. But it's light enough to where you're still interactive, you're mobile, you're engaged and present. You know where you are and what's happening. It's maybe not a lot of difference between looking at you and a sober person, especially if you're an experienced tripper. But here you have an opportunity. It's definitely an altered state and it's going to respond quite a bit more to any layered approaches. So if you're in an intentional therapeutic setting, yeah, you could get some interesting stuff done here for sure, for sure. But at these doses, though, the ego is still quite present. So, a stubborn ego may not be able to move much here. Without, really good guided direction and a very intentional set and setting, this dose range for some people, it doesn't really go very far. So yeah, again, we're still in that realm of needing to layer your experience with something. Now, some people just going out into nature, somewhere beautiful, some doing something meaningful. In general, that kind of exposure with this dose range can be quite profound, quite deep. There can be some great insights and perspective shifts and expanded awareness for sure. So, but it's a low enough though where, again, you're mobile. You can kind of do normal things to some extent. So the setting is maybe a little less restrictive. So we're here at the medium dose, the visionary dose. This is for sure unmistakably intense. Here at this level of psychedelics, this I would say is not for novices. If you're going to jump into this, it's definitely a good idea to have it planned out, to do some preparation, to make sure you're in a safe place. Because here the alterations can be so intense that making normal decisions is going to be noticeably altered, noticeably different. And if you're in a situation where there's some danger, some maybe physical risk, you could be making some irreparable mistakes there. So be careful at these doses. The perceptual alterations are intense. That's why we call it the visionary dose, because your internal experience, or I guess you could say the experience external from your normal realm of awareness, that's where you're going. That's more where your attention and more what your senses are picking up, your higher senses. So a lot of eyes closed journeys happen here. In the clinical context, they certainly give you the blindfold headphone treatment. For traditional shamanic people who are using these medicines, this state probably would be a ceremonial dose, you could say, where you're doing serious work. This is no distractions. You're in it to win it here. So mysticism, this is I would say hard to deny feature of these dose ranges, the ineffable, the experience of a unity, connection, and higher intelligence, and really a non-singular perspective. And then beyond that, the high dissociative dose. So I use the word dissociative as, for lack of a better word, to be honest. I guess you could call this mystical as well. But dissociative, at the very least, suggests that we are not really in the body. We're really kind of past the body is what I'm referring to. Because here the experience can get so intense that it doesn't matter if you have your eyes open or closed. The world that you're in it's not the same world that your default world. It's not what most people call material. Immaterial is really what it is. The pure non-duality, pure consciousness, the mystical realm, the spirit realm, higher dimensions, whatever the heck you want to call it. If you take a high enough dose, you will go there. Like, skeptics, be warned. It's only a matter of dose, especially when you get into the really potent psychedelics like DMT, LSD, ayahuasca. Like, forget about it. Like, there is a point where everyone has to let go. The surrender is unavoidable. Whether or not it's a good idea or safe, yeah, that's why you're taking the class to figure out, how to do that in a safe way. And there is a way, but at these higher doses, obviously, the risk is increased. Another thing that you're risking here is amnesia. It's hard to remember these states of consciousness simply because they're so different. The applicability, it's tough, but that's also kind of the point of integration, is to make it applicable, to bring something back from the other realms, to manifest it in your life. Because people talk about these experiences of non-duality as, being connected to a wisdom that goes beyond the egoic mind. And to be able to bring back some of that wisdom, yeah, that's the Holy Grail, really. That's what it's all about. So, but yeah, be careful. Don't take more than you can integrate. So, more practical tips here, harm reduction tips, finding your dose. So, I'm going to offer a couple perspectives on this, and I don't mean to say one is correct and one is incorrect or more correct, but I am, speaking to an audience from a practical perspective, and so it will be obvious, where I'm leaning here. So from the perspective of being meticulous, to being exact, um, if you are to find the right dose for yourself, and this is really only theoretical because the sheer number of variables involved in how a dose affects you, it's probably incalculable. Here I've listed a few that I could think of, but even looking at that, I mean, how are you going to know? How are you going to test that? It'd be endless experimenting to get to a place of knowing for sure. But that is kind of what the scientific machine is built for, and what modern medicine, pharmaceuticals, and psychiatry aims to do. Um, it's hard though. It's hard is my point. And so, are you going to spend the time and the energy on measuring all these variables to figure out your dose, or you try another method? So the other method then is start low, feel it out, and intuitively arrive at a dose that is what you're looking for. So it's the safe approach, right? You start at a dose less than what you need, and then try it. And then if it's not enough, then try a little bit more. And you can be as precise as you want. Certainly, there's a possibility of overshooting it, in which case you can compensate. But I want to distinguish here, organic substances versus the synthetics. uh, the first method of being meticulous about as many variables as you can, when you have a synthetic, that's more feasible because you've removed some of the variables that organic substances inherently have. Where synthetics, if you get a pure enough substance, it's fairly consistent amongst the batch, and you can recreate it. And there's even you can use chemistry to figure out exactly what it's going to do without having to test it on a person. There's still variables within the human body. Individuals will respond to even synthetics differently. But organic substances, this second method of starting low, trying it out, and then gradually working your way up, that's really kind of the only way with that. So yeah, you kind of feel it out. This method definitely requires some time, a little bit of trial and error, but if you start low enough and you increase it slow enough, you're minimizing so many risks that, especially with some of these safer substances like mushrooms, pretty low risk. So just be responsible though. In this process that we're describing here, you could call calibration. So you'll hear me suggest this often. And again, the organics are really where the variability is going to be higher and the need for calibration, unless you've got an entire laboratory at your fingertips. You're going to need to do that. Otherwise, you're just kind of throwing darts with a blindfold on and hoping that you get the effect that you want. So please calibrate. It's just basic harm reduction. So there's a couple of perspectives on this that I can outline. So far, we've been talking about the titrating up method, where you start with less than you want, and you wait some time to let the tolerance chill out, and then you try again after recording the results or just remembering how it felt. And you do this as gradually as you can until you reach the desired strength, or maybe it's a breakthrough dose a breakthrough experience that you're looking for. But also consider microdosing down as a method. So this, I probably wouldn't use this much with like macro doses, just because at that point, the calibration process itself is a macro dose, and I mean, unless that's you have the time to do that. Microdosing down is start with a slightly higher microdose, or whatever microdose you're at, and then try to get finer and finer measurements that until you can kind of shave off some of the more obvious effects of it, so maybe some of the perceptual effects. Like, for example, sometimes I'll take a microdose, but the colors are definitely a little more saturated. Things are a little more shiny. I notice like there's like just like this subtle but a definite psychedelic feeling to it. And yeah, maybe I want to find a microdose where I don't have any of that, but I do I can think a little clearly. I can just feel a little bit more uplifted and open, and generally just kind of more aware and present. Maybe I just want that much, and it'd be hard to find that unless you kind of gradually worked your way downwards. So similar kind of thing, it's just kind of going the opposite direction. Yeah, and just a helpful harm reduction tip: anytime you get a new supply, a new batch, whether we're talking synthetic or organic, every batch is different. Even if it's from the same person that made it, there's so many variables that can happen in either the growing or the manufacturing or whatever along the way. Even the way you store a substance could cause it to degrade. If you've had it for more than a few months, and depending on if it was, airtight container, could be exposed to various things. Each batch really is going to be different. Okay, so tolerance. Here, it's a concept we've touched on. I think a lot of people understand the basics of it, but yeah, a lot of things affect it. It's not just how strong it feels, but also consider, how your unique metabolism affects tolerance. Some people have a harder time building up tolerance. It's just the way our body breaks these things down and processes them and excretes them. It depends on, our entire organ system. So each person is unique. Some people build more tolerance than others. And then similar, your sensitivity to the effects. Just what you are noticing about a substance is going to affect how strong you think it is. Some people, they'll take a couple grams of mushrooms and they'll be like, oh yeah, I saw some visuals, whatever, it was chill. Other people, 2 grams of mushrooms, it'll be like, yeah, I saw some visuals and it blew my mind. I never knew that anything could be like that. So it's whatever you notice is how you respond to it. So a person's tolerance over time, some of the effects could, just kind of get old or just normal to them. So and then dose and frequency, of course, how often you do it, how much you do, is going to affect how much tolerance you build up. Suppressive medication. So this is something you'll see with like SSRIs, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, antidepressants. They're generally blunting the effects of most psychedelics, and thus your tolerance would build up more significantly. Cross tolerance, I'm honestly on the fence about this one. I don't even know how much it applies. This is the idea that different psychedelics can build a tolerance for other psychedelics. I find that it's usually either like you can just feel both at the same time, or they make it the whole thing stronger. So it could be like an inverse sort of tolerance. Some nuances about tolerance. Different substances, different tolerance curves. So one example is synthetics versus organics. The way your body builds up a resistance to taking a certain amount of something means that when you take just one one thing, you're going to develop a tolerance to that one thing faster than if it were a whole bunch of different things. This is obvious, like when really, I mean, any kind of plant-based medicine. Let's say marijuana, for example. The whole herb, so to speak, of marijuana, the plant, when you ingest that versus when you ingest the extracted forms of THC, like the resins and the oils, the really potent forms of it. Um, yeah, those more manufactured, processed forms, you're going to build up tolerance faster. And you take that to the level of a pharmaceutical, and you're just having a whole lot of one type of thing. You're hitting your receptors in the same way with the same molecule, and your body's going to develop more resistance to it. Whereas any plant compounds, you get in a cocktail of a whole bunch of slightly different but similar compounds, and your body's just going to be able to take more of that in, and you just don't build a tolerance as fast. Absorption methods. So, are you taking this via the stomach? Are you putting it in your mouth, or are you inhaling it, or injecting? These are going to affect how hard it hits your body. Generally the higher the dose, the faster it gets in you, the more tolerance you're going to build up. So yeah, a lot of factors there. All right. So this little diagram here is to speak to what do psychedelics really feel like? And it's not just the dose. You can't just say, oh, 3 grams made me feel this way one day, so then 5 grams is going to just be the same but stronger. No, there's many factors involved. And in general, what I like to point to is the resistance, the egoic resistance. How much is your kind of default perception fighting back against what the psychedelic is doing? This you can encapsulate in terms of really all of our personality traits, the way we perceive life, our beliefs, assumptions, our habits. All of those things come together to be in resistance to psychedelics in some way, because psychedelics, they change everything so fundamentally that anything we kind of took for granted as a given really isn't. And so how much we're willing to let go of that, that's what the psychedelic experience is going to be. So you can imagine people on both ends of the spectrum here, right? Some people, they're kind of go with the flow. They're like, I don't necessarily need to project myself in any specific way. They're a lot more easygoing about embarrassment, or, just kind of less concerned about things, very, very loose hold on life. Psychedelics are probably gonna, just they're gonna go with that flow, right? They're not gonna resist as much and just kind of let go more into that or abstract, expanded way of thinking. Whereas somebody on the other end of the spectrum, someone very egocentric, so to speak, more stubborn people see things a certain way, very, very stern beliefs about life and those kind of big ideas. Yeah, they're going to resist the psychedelic effect quite a bit and probably not going to feel as much as someone who's more kind of go with the flow. So, yeah, one way to talk about what it really feels like and how, all these things react to that. All right, well, good job. This has been the Pharmacology of Psychedelics. I hope you got some cool information and some useful practical stuff from here. Pharmacology is, of course, a very deep, deep science, but just trying to help folks out from a harm reduction perspective. So if you're interested in more, please go deeper to openmindintegration.com. And there's a ton more awesome content in the Psychedelic Harm Reduction course, 12 classes altogether, each one designed to offer some really in-depth practical education on how to reduce your risks, maximize your benefits. And you can view all the slides for every class for free at openmindintegration.com. And there's a bunch of other educational content up there as well. And my personal services, of course, for people going through preparation and integration processes. Here to help folks go a little deeper, be a little safer about it. So please let me know. Thank you.